Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Babies in Common show. I'm Jeanette.
And I'm Melissa. Welcome, everybody. We have another great show for you today. And as a reminder, anything said on this show is not to be taken as medical advice. Please consult your own care providers and visit babiesincommon.com/disclaimer for more information.
So today is Wednesday, August 5th, 2020, and we're going to be discussing going back to work and pumping at work.
No, say it ain't so. But it is an experience that many birth givers in this country, in America, face every day, especially since we are the only OECD country out of 41. That's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development that does not federally mandate paid parental leave of any kind.
Out of 41 countries.
Out of 41 industrialized nations.
America's great. America's great.
So our guests today are two local Babies in Common moms who made it work. Marlena Shaffer is our first guest, and Marlena graduated from the University of Massachusetts of Amherst with a degree in business management and received her MBA from Curry College. She's the marketing manager for a large dental support organization in New England and works in their corporate office. She gave birth to her first daughter, Evelyn, who we call Evie, in June 2019, and she is still breastfeeding and going strong. And she also happens to be my sister.
Awesome. And we also have our friend Julie Longchamps, and she graduated from Boston College School of Nursing, and she's a registered nurse who works 12-hour shifts on a busy hospital surgical intensive care unit. And she's the mother to 3 young boys, and she returned to work with each child, one with 12 weeks, another 13 weeks, and another one 17 weeks postpartum. And she had very different challenges with each baby. And she still figured out how to get coverage on her intensive care floor and find time to pump and store milk at the hospital. And she'll tell you a little bit more about that too.
I feel like the only hard to pump, there's many hard to pump jobs, many. But the other one that's very well represented among women is teachers. I feel like we needed a teacher on here. So if any teachers want to send us an email and want to share their experience of how they made pumping work teaching, please send it to us.
Yeah, and that's why we have 2 Babies in Common Facebook groups that are specific to those 2 jobs. One's called Teachers with Pumping in Common, and the other one is called Medical Workers with Pumping in Common. And they can be joined by anybody around the world, but those 2 jobs have very specific kind of environments versus, I love today that we've got Marlena here too, because she's in a corporate job, so that's one type of environment, but it tends to be a little bit more common, I suppose. Although I don't know what the statistics are there, so I would assume that there's more people working in a corporate environment than a hospital or a medical environment, but I don't know.
Either way, I'm glad to have you both here today.
Yeah,
thank you for coming on to our show.
Yeah. So awesome. Yeah. Taking time from your babies today, which is cool. So we'll start with statistics because Melissa loves statistics.
You know I do.
So in December 2019, the Pew Research Foundation reported that the share of mothers who are working either full or part-time in the United States has increased over the past half century from 51% to 72%. So 2/3. Sorry. See, that's why you're good at statistics, Melissa. 3/4. And out of the aforementioned 41 OECD countries, remember the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the United States is the only industrialized nation that doesn't federally mandate any paid leave for new parents.
And furthermore, here's another staggering statistic. Forbes reported that 25% of new mothers in the United States return to work within 2 weeks of giving birth, 25%. Others, only 6 weeks for a vaginal birth or 8 weeks for a cesarean. Again, many times this is just state job protection, not compensated in any way. And many feel lucky to be able to take 12, again, of course, unpaid through FMLA, or maybe using all of their sick time or vacation time in order to be able to afford it. And unless they work for a company like Netflix, it's likely that if you wanted more time with your baby, you would just have to choose between going back to work or leaving your job. And so if a parent wishes to continue a breast or chest feeding relationship and or wishes to continue to provide their own milk to their baby while they're away, they will need to find some way to express or pump their breast milk while they are at work. So that's why we've invited Marlena and Julie on our show today to hear, any tricks of the trade or barriers that they faced, and so that we can all learn from each other. So let's start with Julie. During your first pregnancy, which was about 7 years ago.
Yeah, almost 7 years ago.
Oh my gosh, our kids are getting so big.
Mm-hmm.
You were working as a registered nurse, as we said, on a surgical ICU floor. You went back nights. And when you were pregnant, what were you planning regarding feeding your baby in general? And what were your plans for returning to work?
I always planned to breastfeed. I didn't know too much about it. I definitely expected that it was going to be easy. Um, I didn't buy any bottles, or I didn't register for bottles. I didn't think about formula or research any of that. I just planned on breastfeeding, and I planned on it being easy and not an issue.
All
Oh,
right.
but the cosmos had something else in store.
Were you always planning on going back to work when
I
you were
was.
pregnant? And so
Yes.
did you feel confident that you were going to be able to find the time to pump?
Honestly, I guess I had never really thought about the challenges or how much work it was going to be. I'm trying to think. I don't think anyone on my unit was pumping at work, so I don't think I really had any nurse mentors to look to for that at that time, anyways. I just kind of, yeah, I don't know. I just kind of didn't really think about it, and then when I went back to work, I kind of, as it got closer and closer, I got a little bit more anxious and kind of made my schedule and just kind of said, I'm going to try to pump around these times and see how it goes.
I remember you talking about how you had to get coverage because some of the people you were taking care of could have
So
major
I
medical issues.
definitely had some issues in that, everyone's busy, everyone has an assignment. Sometimes you feel annoying asking people to cover your patients. Also, sometimes people are really busy and their assignment's really busy, and you know that they don't have time to watch your patients, or maybe they're not going to watch them as closely as you feel like your patients need to be watched.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
could,
I know that feeling.
try to split up my assignment and ask one nurse to watch one patient, a different nurse to watch another patient, which made it a little bit easier rather than handing off my assignment to one nurse, making them have four patients. So
But
you
was your like nurse manager supportive and was there ever like a superior that would come in and help support you with a patient?
know. Well, I work nights, and on nights in the hospital, there's no nurse managers present.
Oh.
That's pretty much
And they
just your,
basically cut you to the bone. It's kind of like a
yeah,
inside joke that's not funny in nursing,
right,
that basically day shift is oftentimes
right. The
staffed,
favorite shift.
you know,
Day shift gets the pizza for lunch, and night shift gets like the leftover crust that's left.
Oh.
That's kind of how it is in the hospital on days versus nights. So there was no management present. There were at my hospital, I assume most hospitals at night, there's a nursing supervisor who's kind of in charge of the unit
Mm-hmm.
or in charge of the hospital. So the problem with that is that oftentimes the nursing supervisors are either A, so removed from nursing practice that they really aren't even qualified to take care of patients anymore, or B, they don't have critical care experience.
Oh wow.
So, maybe some of them do, but not all of them. That's not a requirement for being a nursing supervisor. Nursing supervisor's job is mainly like staffing and bed placement and
Yeah, they spend a lot of time in the ER trying to find beds
right.
for the ER patients that are being
So,
admitted. So,
yeah, so it's definitely different. So there wasn't much support as far as somebody covering my patients. It was never a random person walking around taking my patients. It was always me giving them to a nurse that already had an assignment.
Wow.
all right. So Marlena, your story is a little bit different because you're in a corporate environment. And something also happened during your pregnancy that kind of threw a wrench in the works as far as being able to take time off after the baby is born. So can you tell us what happened?
Oh,
So,
can't hear you. Oh, there you are.
well, so at my previous job, um, they had started doing layoffs. So, and that was around, I wrote it down, that was around like 15 weeks or so, or even before that, you could see like stuff going down. So
People jumping off the ship.
so I started applying to jobs, and I actually had an interview. I looked it up at 19 weeks with a company, and I just wore all black.
A baggy blazer.
Yeah.
baggy blazer. I got a job offer the next day, which was actually a Saturday. They called me and offered me the job, and I panicked because I had just figured out with my current HR of the company that was kind of drowning that I'd get all of FMLA and I'd get paid for the 12 weeks, and I didn't have to use any of my sick time. And I was like, great, this is amazing. And
And just
then
for people who don't know, because we've said FMLA a couple times, it's Family Medical Leave Act, which is a federal law that requires employers to give you 12 weeks off to take care of a new child in the family or a sick relative, but they don't have to pay you.
They don't have to
right,
pay you.
so
It's
I was
job
going to get paid
protection.
through my
And not all
short-term
employers qualify because they don't have enough employees.
Right.
So that's the other thing too.
But you were going to get paid because your employer would pay people. That was just their benefit package.
Yes, through my benefit package, I had short-term disability, and I was
Mm.
like, gonna almost get 100%. But then people started jumping ship, and I had an interview, and then the next week, so like 3 days later, my boss came in my office with like an HR folder, and he had gotten laid off, and I was like, great, guess what? I got a new job. So I started my brand new job at 22 weeks pregnant, crying and telling my boss on like day one, by the way, I kept a secret, I'm pregnant.
You said that on day one? Wow.
Oof.
Well, it's hard. It puts people in a predicament because they, technically, federally, they're not, it's illegal to discriminate against someone because they're pregnant.
Mhm.
However, we all know it happens all the time. If it comes down between you and somebody else that, they know they're not going to have to train and then take off time in 20 weeks. I mean, it definitely puts people in a really difficult position. So,
Yeah.
but at some point, you got to kind of let the cat out of the bag. So, how did this affect the way you were like thinking about, how were you planning on feeding your baby when you were pregnant? Did that change at all when you lost your job and had to switch?
So I talked to my boss and told her, like, again, pretty much day one, I'm going to be gone pretty much 4 months, and whenever I can come back, I want to breastfeed. So we kind of talked about a lot of stuff like right away. And so I had planned on breastfeeding, but for the entire time I was on my 8 weeks off of maternity leave, no pay, HR just kept emailing me random questions like, how long do you plan on breastfeeding? I was like, I don't know the answer to that question right now. Do I have to tell you a specific timeline? Because I guess the conversation that was happening behind the scenes was I was the only person who was going to be a mom with an infant there. They hadn't had anybody who breastfed in the office before, and they didn't know where to put me. They almost rented a closet essentially on another floor. They were going to get one of those pods that you put at like a construction site, and I'm like, oh great, I'm going to walk into a pod every day. Everyone's going to know what I'm doing.
Did you have your own office?
So I didn't. So I had a cube.
Okay. Yeah.
So I didn't actually know where I was going to pump until I showed up.
And that's nerve-wracking.
So I just knew that there would be some place, and I thought, worst comes to worst, I'll just pump in the bathroom. It would have been terrible, but I knew that I could figure it out. So there was
the law says that they should not be making you pump in the bathroom. However,
but they
right?
didn't. There was no like, by the way, this is what you're going to have when you get back. They just kind of forgot to tell me. So I just showed up, and they actually did put a health room in. It was just happened to be that somebody left, so there was an open office. I do not know where they would have put me otherwise. So they got a fridge, and they put a lock on the door, and they put a sign that said "Health room, do not enter."
Health room. So could other people do other things in the health room?
Yeah, right. Does everybody just go in there to get their vaccines on and things like that?
Or take a nap,
They said that they didn't want to call it the nursing room. It was just the health room in case other people needed to use it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, got it.
Yeah.
All right, hey, well,
I'm
I just
happy
thought it was interesting, because obviously I'm your sister, so we talk a lot. And when you were having your daughter, Evie, I was having my daughter, Marceline. So Marceline's my third and Evie's your first. So, I had some experience, obviously, to, help you along. And it was just funny to me, funny, not funny, right? That like this big corporate office with, lots of women in the office, they had never thought about this before. Like this had never come up. And I don't know if that's because didn't seem to be a welcoming environment. So women didn't ask for it, or if they felt discouraged from doing it, or maybe they were hiding in their car to pump, but kudos to you for kind of, being like, hey, well, this is something that I want to do. It probably helped a little bit that your boss had children. She was a woman and she had children. But it's like, hi, I'm gonna need this. It's not it's not like you're asking for something extra, but like I'm gonna ask for this like accommodation that like you guys are all scrambling about.
But also when there's an office that has an HR person who actually 100% of the time does HR, which I assume your company does, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't seem, in all the people that I hear from over the years about going back to work, it doesn't seem like HR staff have all training in this area. Like they're not assertively going, oh, you're having a baby. Okay, well then we will work in our office because this is the law. We already knew that, so we will work to set that up before you get back. Like it doesn't seem very common. So
yeah, the reason that the renting one of these pods came to play is because, I mean, like most corporate offices, we had a lot of men who are at the management level and also in HR, and they were like, well, how long is she going to be breastfeeding for? Like 2 months? My God, who had her own kids, she had twins, and she pumped. No, she's like, it's up to her, and it could be like a year. And then there's other ladies in this office who may have children. We probably should figure this out.
Yeah.
Good for her. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm surprised that you even told them that you were breastfeeding. Like, I guess I never even thought to tell my manager that I was planning on breastfeeding.
I think it's a good conversation to have. I think that, when I talk to my childbirth ed students about like, if they email me going back to work, pumping, whatnot, I definitely recommend the Breast Milk and Conversation group. I feel like that group or any breastfeeding support group is going to be a great way to learn from other moms. I mean, as a nurse who had worked with breastfeeding women as a labor and delivery nurse, when I had my first, I would not have survived my first year of breastfeeding without Breast Milk and Conversation, because I learned so much from the other moms that I worked with. It didn't matter that I understood the anatomy and physiology of a lactating boob. There's so much about parenting and breastfeeding that's just like kind of, experiential, right? So
just the logistics of pumping and when, I mean, I get those questions every time in group, right? When do I start pumping? Which bags do you guys use? Do you freeze in the bags or do you refrigerate it first? And then can you combine the milk? Like there's so many questions. And are you pumping right into the bags when you're at work, or do you pour it in? What's safer? How are you storing it?
Do you have a cooler? Do you have a refrigerator? Yeah.
What if you have a job where you drive around all day and you literally don't have an office to go to and you're pumping in your car? I mean, there's so many nuances. Which pump are you using? Which one works for you? Which flange works for you? Well, we might get into that a little bit, but there's a lot of questions.
Yeah, it's true. And there's tips you can learn from other parents. As simple as, I remember one tip I learned, she was like, oh, make sure when you freeze your milk, freeze it flat on a cookie sheet.
Mm-hmm.
That way it takes up less space in the freezer. I'm like, oh my God, that's brilliant. Like, I don't think I would have thought of that. Like, I don't know what I was thinking. I was thinking maybe I was going to freeze the milk in bottles in the freezer. Like, I didn't know, because I never, as a nurse, had to worry about freezing breast milk. People just get it right from the tap where I work. So, so how did breastfeeding go for both of you guys on maternity leave? We'll start with Julie.
With my first, well, I should say with all three of my children, we struggled initially. I think it got subsequently better with each child quicker. So my first child, my entire maternity leave was kind of a struggle. I went back to work still using a nipple shield, still pumping kind of a lot. With my second child, I think I kind of cut that off maybe around like 6 weeks or so. And I would say probably sometime around the same time for my third, but my third never took a bottle. So while I pumped occasionally, I think things got better quicker because I just had no other option.
Meaning feeding him directly at the breast?
Yes. Even when I was having a lot of pain, I felt like I had no other option but to continue because he wouldn't take a bottle even early on.
Yes, complexities. Yeah.
So
what about
you?
So
Marlena, yeah, that's
so
how did breastfeeding
Marlena?
go for you during maternity leave?
So me and Evie both had thrush at the very beginning, because I had antibiotics during delivery, and it was awful.
Mm.
Because I loved it. I loved breastfeeding, and I still do, but it was very painful. And I had to give her that yellow medicine like 7 times a day, and that was honestly the worst thing ever. So we were both constantly sticky from the medicine and like trying to get her to swallow that, and then I had to always put stuff on my nipples, and the first couple of weeks were pretty rough because it felt like knives were coming out of my boobs.
Oh, I remember those days.
Yeah.
So I think that lasted because then I got it like again, like it didn't fully go away. We had it for a solid month or so that I was
And you
giving
were
her
sterilizing everything, I remember, as per the
Sterilizing.
recommendations, because fungus is hard to get rid of. So you were like, everything she touched with her mouth, you were washing and sterilizing bottles and pump parts and washing everything in hot water. And that's a lot of extra work.
Yeah, it was. So the sterilizing, yeah, all of her pacifiers and everything like that. So after that, the last 2 weeks of maternity leave were pretty okay because the thrush was gone, and that was nice. But the first 6 weeks were pretty rough.
Hmm. Wow. And then you're getting ready to go back to work. And what were you doing to get ready as far as like how much milk did you have in the freezer or the fridge? And how often were you practicing bottle feeding? What were you doing to prepare for the weeks leading up to work? Julie.
Well, for me, my first, he got a lot of bottles early on because we had a lot of struggles with breastfeeding. And so pretty much from early on, he was getting bottles. Initially, just overnight. Initially, we were trying to just do them overnight, and then we kind of started gradually weaning off overnight. And but he consistently got bottles throughout maternity leave, so I never really had to do much to prepare for him taking bottles. I think as far as how much milk to pump and how much to put in a bottle, I think I honestly, it's hard to think back, but I'm guessing I always went to the babies in common, groups. So I think I just learned a lot from the groups as far as how much milk to leave and how much, plus he was at my house. He wasn't going to daycare. He was at the house with my husband because I was working overnight. So worst case scenario, there was always more milk in the fridge. So I never really had to worry too much about that.
Because you had a lot of milk.
I had a lot of milk.
So can you just share can you just share as a point of inspiration for those who have a lot of milk, how much milk you've donated in your lifetime?
It's hard to remember, but I would honestly have to say I've probably donated about like 6,000 ounces.
That's
I think
amazing.
I donated probably the most with my first, and then I definitely would easily give away 1,000 ounces at a time. I helped a lot of moms, and I wish I had written down all these moms that I had helped. But funny story is, several years ago, I won. I don't know. There was like a girl that I'm friends with on Facebook, and she was selling or doing a raffle. So I entered my name into this raffle, and I won a shirt from like LuLaRoe or something. And she mailed it to me with a card. And on the card, she was like, I don't know if you remember, but you donated milk to my daughter when she was a baby. So it was kind of nice.
Nice.
I did remember. Now I don't know. Did she purposely pick my name? I don't know. But that was kind of a nice little full circle, as a thank you. But with my second child, I had a little bit of bottle struggles with him. We started off, he got bottles pretty regularly in the beginning, and then once nursing got better, he didn't get any bottles for a very long time. And when I was going back to work, I had some trouble getting the bottle into him. My husband had problems. We had trouble getting him to take it. But when I went back to work, he took it, and it was never an issue ever again. He took his bottles, and it was never a problem. I remember that first day back to work, texting the daycare provider, oh, did he eat? And he ate fine. My third child,
Gav.
yeah. So he was my troublemaker. I probably went through 20 different bottles, literally every brand. I was Googling weird bottle names, trying to find other bottles, convinced that if I bought this $35 bottle, he was going to magically take it. He did never take it. So that was definitely a struggle. I tried daily. I sent him to daycare several times while I was on maternity leave, hoping that daycare would be able to get him to take it. And truthfully, I'm not sure how invested they were. My child, while he didn't eat all day, he was surprisingly happy for them. And never was asking to eat, was never fussy, was never acting hungry. So they also weren't like, oh, this child won't stop crying, we got to feed him. They were just kind of like, well, he's happy. I mean, I guess he's good.
Yeah.
And I was more anxious about it, knowing that I was going back to work for these 12-hour shifts, leaving, I work in Rhode Island, so leaving an hour before, coming home an hour late, gone from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. I was very anxious that my child was going to be dehydrated and kidney failure. I had schemed up this whole crazy thing. I have a friend who is a NICU nurse and was like, well, maybe you can just drop an NG tube down. Well, so they can see it. And I was like, I don't know how to do that. I can't do that on a baby. I was like, I don't think that's like a thing.
Spoken like a true NICU nurse. Just drop an NG, just drop it.
It's like, so that was very stressful. We ended up, per Jeanette's recommendation, maybe 2 weeks before going back to work, buying a sippy cup. And he took to that pretty much immediately. While daycare wasn't great at feeding him the cup. And that was a little bit of a struggle. My husband would often go to daycare on his lunch break and feed Gavin so that he at least got a feeding in. He did take to it pretty easily, and my husband became a pro very quickly. So
wow, good for you for thinking outside the box on that one.
Yeah,
it was a huge struggle. I definitely thought my child was going to starve to death.
I hear that all the time, and in retrospect, like that was 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and there's so much that now people have taught me and other people about how to help babies take a bottle and figuring that out, and it doesn't always work, of course. There's some kids who are just like, I like it from the tap. I'm not going to take this plastic thing, and so you try everything, and none of it works, but at least in many cases something works. But one of the things with your second baby, we always have to wonder for anybody's baby that's not taking a bottle, or to prevent them from not taking a bottle, is to make sure, as much as I love how breastfeeding at the breast is a lovely thing, we live in a modern society. If you're going back to work, we have to be really sure your baby's going to drink from either a bottle or a cup. I don't care which one, but I do care which bottle it is and which cup it is, though. I'm more picky about my sippy cups now, too. But making sure that your baby's taking it at least 3 times a week is kind of my general recommendation at this point. Not just, oh, they took it at 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever. They took it for a few times. We're good. They'll take it. And then we'll wait another 2 months. And then now you're at the week before you go back to work and panicking because your baby won't take a bottle. It's
I think
like,
for us, one of the struggles was, especially with our third, he never wanted it from the beginning.
Right.
Then it became such a chore for my husband to try.
Right.
With this screaming child and 2 other children who were 2 and 4 at the time, that he would always say, just nurse him, it's so much easier.
Yeah.
And it was so much easier. And given all the issues and struggles I had with nursing, I was so excited that he was finally nursing and nursing so well, and that it was easier, that I did just want to nurse him. And I didn't push the bottle thing. But like I said, it was never easy from day one as far as the bottles. So it was just always so much easier. And my husband would always just say, oh, he'll take the bottle. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. And I think I had kind of like secretly convinced myself it'll be fine. And then, a month, 6 weeks or whatever. So before going back to work, when I was trying every day and it wasn't working, I was just had this like growing anticipation and was like, oh, we definitely should have done this from day one type thing. But, like I said, it was so hard to get to where I was with nursing that I was like almost fearful for something to intervene and cause
Sure. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. So Marlena, what about you?
How did breastfeeding go for you during, oh wait, you already talked about that. Did you do anything to prepare for going back to work regarding feeding the baby?
So I did go to some of Jeanette's groups, and I also went to another mom group. So I asked a lot of questions about how do you mix the milk together and all of that stuff. So I got all of the information I needed, which was great. But I did procrastinate on giving Evie a bottle because I just have not been good with any change after Evie's been born. Like with changing to feeding or baby led weaning or whatever it was. I always like waited just until the end because I didn't want to change what was working. But we were lucky. We tried one bottle. We went on a walk, got some ice cream one day. My parents came over and they tried to feed her a bottle, and she just cried the whole time. But at least I was out of the house. Rob tried, my husband, and he's like, "I'm covered in milk."
And you're like, now you know how it feels.
So it was really funny because I was like, haha. But we did then try a different bottle, and that one was slower and recommended from I went to, and then she took that one really well. So we didn't have that much struggles, just a couple of spills and stuff like that. But we luckily only tried like 2 bottles, and then Evie did really good with it with Rob and at Jake.
Yeah, I want to definitely like get to pumping, but the last thing I'll say about bottles is that there are, like Julie said, like there's like probably like 35 of them on the market, and there's really only a few that seem to be more, I don't know if I want to use the word approved, but the ones that those of us who have studied bottles seem to like more for babies and help babies use their mouth the way that they're supposed to be using their mouth. And so many bottles don't. And I think sometimes I have found that babies who are refusing bottles or struggling taking a bottle, it's the bottle itself. And so it's not really always worth it to buy all the different types of bottles. It's figuring out why won't the baby take a bottle, and is it the bottle itself or is there something else going on? Because sometimes if a baby's refusing a bottle, there's something else going on. It's not the bottle itself, which is, I know Julie went through a lot of those questions too.
Well, that's a good point too, Jeanette, because as we've said on the podcast before, you and some other IBCLCs that you know, but I also know you, do bottle feeding consults, not just breastfeeding consults. So even if breastfeeding is going swimmingly, you're making plenty of milk and the baby's nursing at the breast wonderfully and you're going back to work, you're having trouble with the bottle, call up Jeanette, and if she's not available, she knows people who have taken the same training as her that she can refer you to.
Or even if they're doing 100% formula and they're having issues with
exactly,
bottle.
feeding with the bottle. And we talked about that in our VNA episode, visiting nurse episode. So, bottle feeding consult can be a great idea. So now the day comes to go back to work. The day that everybody kind of dreads if you're going back to work. I remember it very well. What was your first day back like, and how did pumping go? We'll start with Marlena.
I don't really remember it.
It was a blur.
It was very much a blur. I did try to do 3 times a day, and I blocked off my calendar. Most of that day, I just remember talking to people coming over my cube and asking me and for pictures of the baby. So it was a very nice welcome back. I couldn't figure out how, like, all my business clothes were like button ups, and I did wear like a nursing bra, but I like took off my shirt.
It feels so odd, doesn't it? You're like, I'm at work, I'm behind this door, but I'm like stripping down at work. Never mind like the feeling of walking into that room and knowing everybody who can see you, like, I know what you're gonna do.
Yeah. So it was like I used to hang my shirt on the doorknob before I figured out how to do it with my shirt on. And like I didn't have to be like totally naked. I wouldn't walk out without a shirt on and just my sweater that I would put over my shoulder.
Oh my God, that's so funny. Yeah.
By accident. Like, because one time I walked to Target and like my thing was like down. And
oh, your flap. Oh.
My shirt was up, and I'm like, you have to tell me if I'm walking out of the house without a shirt on.
If I had a nickel for every time my boob was hanging out.
So the first day back went okay. It went by fast. I pumped like I thought. So that was good. But yeah, it was.
And what were you doing while you were pumping? Because the law says that you are supposed to be given breaks to pump, but it doesn't say that you have to be paid for those breaks. So but if your employer could say that if you take that break and you're not working during that time, that they can add that time to your day, so that you'd have to stay like an hour and a half later if you pumped 3 times for half an hour or so. Or were you taking work in and doing work while you were pumping, or did you find, like some people do, that you can't do work because hormonally your brain needs to be entertained with something that's not work to be able to get the milk out?
So I worked while I was pumping because I always have been the person who eats my lunch at my desk so I can go home faster. unless the job required me to take that hour lunch break, to which I would just go to like TJ Maxx and spend too much money or something like that. So since I didn't have to do that, I would bring my computer in and I would work during it. I would always look at the baby pictures or pictures of Evie first to like get it started. And then I would work because I didn't want to stay extra time away from the baby. So I was always like around my pumping and typing on my laptop. And sometimes I would take phone calls and I would just mute when I wasn't talking, or I would turn off the pump, hit the unmute button, talk, hit the mute button, and then turn the pump back on.
And so you had a pumping bra, which is helpful, I assume.
I did wear a pump. I did wear like the $5 pack off of five pack off of Amazon. It wasn't very flattering, but
yeah,
and it depends. Like 5 shirts that I could unbutton quickly that weren't. None of my business clothes were helping with that situation.
Oh, that's something to think about for anybody going back to a corporate environment. Yeah, I'm very grateful that my job as a nurse, I get to wear pajamas, basically. I think scrubs are the greatest invention ever.
That's why I pretty much took my shirt off, because I would button it, but it was still very tight everywhere. So I couldn't do anything. I figured it out eventually. And
yeah. And then Julie, you had a very different environment because you were pumping, but like, I mean, I imagine, and I know we talked about it, but like your patient is in intensive care and you like got to get back to them. So how was that for you?
You know, I would say it was a little bit different for my first child versus my second and third, which were more similar. My first, I was working nights, so that was a challenge. You know, it's funny, I remember my first day back, like very vividly. I was up to float and I walked in.
Oh God, that means float to another unit.
I had to float to the medical ICU, which I was already sad. I cried my whole way to work. I cried the whole day, you know. I cried probably the week before. I walked into work. Everybody was like, Julie, it's so nice to see you. How's the baby? I immediately started crying. Like the mention of the baby just made me cry. You know, it was a disaster. Somebody voluntarily floated for me, so I didn't have to float. So that was very nice. I didn't know that there was a pumping room at the hospital, and I didn't know to ask. I don't know. I just didn't know. I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know who to ask.
But sometimes that room is so far away from you anyway that it's not logistically feasible for you to use it.
So I never actually found out that there was a pumping room until I had my second child. My hospital actually has 3 of them. But it didn't really matter because I was on nights. So I figured, okay, I'm going to pump. I had kind of these like set times in my head. I wanted to pump around 9, 1, and 4. I was leaving my house at 6 p.m., I think 5:45, 6 o'clock. So I figured 9, 1, 4 will be my times. So sometime around 9, 9:30, you know, when it was getting close to 9, I would try to like wrap up my stuff. Sometimes I didn't go until 9:30, you know, sometime around there. If I had time at 8:45, I was like, oh, I'll go now. I have time. And I used our locker room because like I said, I didn't know where else to go.
I hear a lot of medical providers saying they're using locker rooms.
Yeah. So I used the locker room, which was overall a pretty good space, except that is the only like staff private bathroom on my unit. So there's another bathroom in our break room, which is a separate room. But like, who wants to go in the bathroom when there's a bunch of people eating their food in the break room? Nobody. So, and then there is another bathroom in the hallway, but that's really like a visitor bathroom. So also, who wants to use the visitor bathroom? Everybody wants the private bathroom in the locker room. But it was fine. For the most part, I would tell people I'm going to go pump. I'd put a note on the door. It was fine. The only time I really ever encountered a problem was if I pumped around like 2:30, say I was like late pumping, or sometimes people would come in early, pick up a shift at 3 a.m. and people would get there at like 2:45 and they needed to go in the locker room to put their stuff away. So sometimes it was a little bit like people would come in the locker room. Sometimes people would be like, oh, you didn't tell, maybe I forgot to tell everyone I was going, because I mean, realistically, people are busy, they're running around. I'm not telling everyone. Then people would be like, oh, I just want to get my money. I wanted to go downstairs to the cafeteria. So I just usually be like, okay, come in, whatever. As far as, you know, technique, I kind of, when I pumped in the locker room, because I was nights, things were a little bit different and a little bit slower. So I didn't really eat when I pumped. It was nights, so I didn't talk on my phone. I really kind of would sit there. I think sometimes if I was really busy, I would wheel in a computer and chart on the computer, but I didn't really do too much with my first back. My second and third, I was on days. So it was a lot busier. It was a lot more stressful. I tried to stick with similar times as far as pumping, the 914-ish. But it was days and it was a lot more stressful. I learned where the pumping rooms were. There were 2 of them on the 2nd floor, which is where my unit is. And while they weren't far away, they weren't incredibly close. And days was a lot busier. So sometimes it was time consuming just to even take 5 minutes to walk there.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was days, there's a PA NP room on my unit, which most of our coverage works 24-hour shifts. So that's their sleep room. But during the day, they don't sit in there. They're taking care of patients. They're on the unit. So I was very fortunate in that I would just tell them, can I use your room to pump? And nobody ever cared. So I would pump with my hands-free bra, chart because I had a computer in front of me. I had it down to a science. I would chart this, these assessments on my first pump. I was charting my notes on my second pump. I was charting,
nice.
I had it down to a science. So I would pump, I would chart. I would often, because it was daytime, I would not FaceTime. I would call my husband. I put my phone on speaker, and I would often eat because I didn't have
the ultimate multitasker.
Right. Ultimate, mom level multitasking, charting, eating, talking to my husband, pumping at the same time. But honestly, I attribute that multitasking to being successful because I have nurses since then who have pumped at work and they'll complain, oh, I only got to pump once today. And I'm like, yeah, you did. I mean, obviously I don't say this aloud, but I'm always, yeah, you pumped once, but you spent all this time socializing or you ate lunch. Like if you had brought your lunch back there, you could have twice. I mean, I'm not going to say that to people, but that's what I'm always thinking, because I was straight business. I worked. I saved my charting for when I was pumping because I knew when I was on the floor, I did not have time to waste at a computer. I had to take care of my patients. And when it was, when I pumped, that's when I did that, my charting and my other things that I needed to do. If I had a patient going up to another floor, I would, if possible, wait to call report until I got him back and was pumping. Because it, and in some ways it was really nice. It was that uninterrupted time that I could chart on my patients that nobody could call me.
Yeah.
But I really think, I made pumping a priority and I made my work around it. And it was very helpful.
It's interesting too, because before I had talked to so many medical professionals about pumping at work, my brain went to, you're all medical professionals. Who cares who pumps in front of you? Or why would you care if you're pumping in front of some of your colleagues? They're all medical professionals. But you're all human, and there are certain people who want to be more private about that. There's many medical professionals that are like, pumping? What are you doing? Yeah, they're so unfamiliar. It makes them uncomfortable because they're also human. And so it's not as simple. So in case anybody else is thinking what's the big deal, Julie, you're a nurse. Why couldn't you pump in front of the other nurses? It's because you're human and not everybody likes to feel comfortable doing that or seeing that.
Comfortable. And I don't, you know what, to be honest with you, there's many people at my work who know that I'm still nursing my almost 3-year-old, but there's also many people that don't know. And I'm sure there's some that know and think it's weird too, to be honest with you. However, I will say I work with 2 other nurses right now who are both extended breastfeeding and are kind of I don't really care what you think, this is what I'm doing and this is what I want to do. So I think that definitely helps. But it's, it's, I think, unfortunate that you almost, maybe you assume as a healthcare professionals that this is widely accepted and known that breastfeeding and pumping is, healthy for your baby and is a wonderful thing to do. There's many people who don't think that way and and are like, oh, you're breastfeeding? Or, oh, that's weird. Some people.
Because it's not part of your training either. It's not widespread that everybody's going to know that.
I don't work with moms. There's no maternity at my hospital. it's not a, it's not something that people at my hospital even know about. Some people do, but some people really, it's like speaking another language.
Mm. Speaking of that, Melissa, you were pumping mom on a labor and delivery floor for many years.
Yes. Yes.
Do you feel like in the labor and delivery world, it was like super supportive and people were giving you coverage and you could feel very free in that way? Do you feel like the
It's so
culture was
funny that you
different?
say that. It's so funny that you say that because yes and no, right? So yeah, it's interesting to say that they were both supportive and I guess indifferent. I wouldn't say unsupportive, but what's funny is, so I do work. I'm an OBGYN nurse. And so when I got pregnant with my first, I switched jobs. I was working labor and delivery in a very, very busy labor and delivery unit where I didn't even get time to go to the bathroom or to eat. Most of the time, it was delivery recovery on one unit, and then a separate unit was the maternity or postpartum unit. And so you would labor, deliver, recover that patient in under 2 hours. That had to be over on postpartum to turn over that room to give you another labor patient. And so one of the reasons why I left that job during pregnancy was because breastfeeding was very important to me. And again, I'm not trying to preach to anybody or that this is how you should feel, but I know that for me, breastfeeding was very, very important. It was a very important goal of mine. And so I took an office job and a big pay cut to have a set schedule. And because at the time when I was working labor and delivery, I was working an hour and a half away in Cambridge, and I was working day, night, rotating shifts, 12 or 8 hours. So I didn't know if I was going to be on days or nights. It was like 3 weeks days, 1 week nights. And so it was just the headache of even trying to figure out childcare was like giving me anxiety. And so I took a pay cut to work in an office. It was an OBGYN office. And so what I would do is I would pump at so what's funny is the office that I had at this place I shared with another nurse. This nurse was childless by choice. She used to be in the military. She was very old school. She also was an IBCLC, and yet me being completely unabashedly bare-breasted, it doesn't matter to me if anybody sees my boob or my nipple. To me, it's just like nobody should.
You show your own birth
problem.
in some of your classes.
Yeah, I do.
That I filmed, by the way.
Yes, that you filmed. I did not pump in that office, even though it was just me and this IBCLC. She was just such a prude. I'm going to be honest. Like she was just such a prude that I was like, I knew it was going to be an issue. And so I would just go in because the doctors and nurse practitioners would have offices, but they weren't always all there at the same time. They worked different days. So I would just go in an empty office, or sometimes I would go in an empty patient exam room and just wheel in like a Mayo stand, which is like a metal, sterile stand. And I would like put my pump on that and plug it in and pump. So
and that's another idea for pumping is no matter where you work, does somebody have an office that they could vacate for 20 or 30 minutes to help you pump? And I've said that to many people and they're like, oh, I haven't thought to ask. And like, maybe I could ask. Even teachers like, ask your principal. And a lot of people are like, the principal's like, sure, I'll leave. I got things I need to do anyway.
Or like at my husband's school, there's like he's a math coach. And so there's, he has his own office. But he's not in it for many periods of the day because he's teaching with other teachers in their classrooms. So, my husband, I've told him, like, when there's a pregnant person at his job, like another pregnant teacher, I'm like, tell her that your wife like is a nursing mom and like that you will gladly leave, like, because it might be, I don't want them to be like, why does he want me to pump in his office? Is there like a secret camera in there or something? Like, I'll be like, tell him that your wife's a labor and delivery nurse and that you know how important it is to pump, and that like, if they need to use your office to pump, like it's air conditioned, and like, let them use your office. So definitely ask around if you're a teacher or something like that. With my second, I was still working in an office, but it was a different office location. And at that point I was sharing the office with this amazing nurse practitioner friend of mine who was also nursing and pumping. So we would both be pumping at the same time and do it on our computer. And I would be doing phone calls, triage calls, and she'd be, charting. And what's really funny is we were just busy, right? Like she tried to block off her schedule for when she could pump, but like the medical assistants were like constantly interrupting us to ask questions about where can I schedule this patient, or, you know, do you want me to call this patient for you and tell her to come 15 minutes later? And so in the beginning, we were putting a sign on the door that we were pumping, but after a while, like we just left the door open because, you know, I mean, the medical assistants were all cool, and, you know, it was an OBGYN office. So we were just like, you know, what we would do is we would take the arms out of our shirt so that the shirt would be around our neck, put our pumping bra on, hook up the pump, then put the shirt back on. So it was kind of covering the pump. There was no nudity. And so if they came in, what's funny is in the beginning, they would come in and interrupt, and they'd start talking, and then they'd realize we were pumping, and they were like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And we'd be like, it's fine. And then after a while, they were just like, they would just completely ignore the pump and ask their questions and get out. So that worked out. With my third, at that point, I was working 8-hour shifts, evenings, LDRP at a community hospital. So what was
So
nice
labor
about
and delivery
that,
postpartum.
yeah, labor, delivery, recovery, postpartum. So once a patient delivered, we didn't have to rush them to another unit. They stayed with us in that room. And so there was no rush. So I also worked with a number of incredible breastfeeding, pumping moms, whatnot in that unit. So they were always, you know, offering to cover for me or whatnot. But what I actually, there was a pumping room on our floor. It was part of the it was part of the well baby nursery. But that was even too far away, even though it was probably, I could throw a baseball and hit the door. It was just, with labor and delivery, things happen so quickly, and I needed to be able to see the strips. So anybody who is an OB nurse knows that even when you ask someone to cover your shift, it's funny, Julie, that you say that you sometimes when people say they'll cover your patients, you know, they're not really going to watch them. So I might say to somebody like, oh, can you cover my patient in 10? She's sleeping with an epidural. And they would probably cover her light, but they might not have been watching her strip. And so what I would do, if I went down to the breastfeeding room, I couldn't see the baby's heart rate on the monitor. So I would pump in the break room because there was a big screen with all the baby's heart rate. So that way I could at least monitor the baby's heart rate. Now, there was quite a few times where I would see a decel and I would just unplug and run down the hall and just leave my milk on the table because, you know, didn't happen very often, but every once in a while. And it was the break room, of course, so people were coming in and out. But at that point, I had a pump that was different than the pump I had with my first. It was incredibly quiet. The only way you could tell I was pumping, because I just had my scrub top pulled over and I was eating, like Julie said. I think that's the key in many jobs, but definitely nursing, is multitasking. Pumping was important to me. Breastfeeding was important to me. I already worked 3 to 11. It already took me till midnight to get out to finish my charting. I didn't want to be there till 1 in the morning, right? Trying to finish my charting if I took an extra time to eat lunch. So I would pump and eat, and watch the strips. And people would be coming in, but the only way they would know if I was pumping is if they put their hands on the table, because the pump would vibrate the table. So what's really funny is the chief of obstetrics one time, which is a guy, he comes in, we're all sitting around eating, nobody even realizes that I'm pumping because nobody saw me hook up, and I have my scrub top pulled over. And even though it's poking out, the pump parts didn't poke out that much. I'm eating, my lunchbox is in front of me, so you couldn't really tell. And he's talking, and he puts his hands on the table, and he jumps back, and he's like, oh my God, what is that? And everybody's like, what are you talking about? He's like, is that an earthquake? And they're like, what? I'm like, and I like pick up my pump. I've got my sandwich in. I'm like, nope, I'm just lactating over here. He was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm like, I don't care. You're an OBGYN. It's fine. And then somebody goes, after he leaves the room, I'm not embarrassed. We're all laughing our butts off. Somebody goes, oh, did you ask permission to pump in here? And I looked at her and I go, no, you got a problem with it? She goes, no, I just didn't know if you needed permission. I was like, no, I didn't need to ask permission. I just did it because
it's actually even more appropriate that you would pump in the break room where people are eating, because you are producing food. You're cooking. You're making somebody's lunch.
I'm basically a chef here.
Yes.
Okay. Oh my God, that's so true.
So, Marlena, do you have any funny pumping stories or drama that happened because you were pumping, or things people said to you?
No, everyone at my work was, Melissa said it earlier, my boss was supportive, and then everyone else was just not supportive. So I did block off times on my calendar, but nobody ever didn't care about them. So I would just be in meetings until they were done. And a lot of the times you're the only woman in the room. So one time we had a meeting and it lasted from like 9 to 1. It was only supposed to be like 9 to 11, but we talked and we were supposed to also go to lunch. And it shouldn't be embarrassing, but it's embarrassing because then they're like, okay, now we're going to lunch. And I was like exploding. And
I thought you were going to say you were leaking and people were like,
no, that was another time though, that I just walked into my boss. I was like leaking, but I was like, I'll just meet you there at lunch. And then I showed up like 25 or 30 minutes later because I had to pump and they were all going to eat. So it's just weird, like saying that you have to go pump. And I also would like feel weird when I was going in. Like I'd like try to make sure nobody saw me when I went into the room. But that, again, it just is because it wasn't very common. And then the only other time that was, I guess, kind of funny, if I have that many stories, is I forgot breast pads and I forgot my pump part, like one piece. And so I couldn't pump, but I didn't realize that until I had already gone past the point of no return. And I ran into my boss's office and I was like, I have to go home because, and then like I started leaking and I was like, and like coming through my sweater and I was like, I gotta go. Covered up. And she's like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm like, bye. So,
she's like, I don't need to know more. That's all I need to see.
So other than that, it pretty much went well. I cut down my pumping. I would feed on one side in the morning and Haka on the other, and the Haka worked really well for me, or whatever brand it was. It was like Bumblebee or something. It wasn't even a Haka. And
Haka, for those who are watching, is this silicone passive pump that looks like a vase, and there's big debates in the lactation world whether this is a good idea or not.
Oh, really?
Because it just hangs on a breast. You suction it to the breast and just hangs there, and for some people it seems to create an oversupply, or I fortunately haven't worked with anybody that does this, but they're feeding the Haka, so to speak, and then they're putting that in the fridge and their baby's not growing well.
Oh, right. Yeah, you don't want to do that.
Okay, well, we all need to think this through before we use the tools. But even just using the Haka like while you're driving, it's silicone. It shouldn't be distracting, and it's probably safer. Well, definitely safer if you have a pumping bra on to have the Haka on, because you don't want to accidentally knock it off and then get distracted when you're driving. But it's like a really easy, non-electric, nothing that would damage you if, God forbid, anything happened. But I think that's helpful, or just while you're, nursing your baby, to be able to collect a little extra on the side. It doesn't work for everybody, though.
I was lucky. It did work for me very well. So I would get almost a full Haka, and I would just feed her on one side instead of switching in the morning. So then I could eliminate a pump when I got to work, because I wanted to pump around 10, but I never could. Like if you get into work at 8:30 or 9, you're not taking a break at 10 o'clock. So I wouldn't take a break until like 11 or something like that. So that worked really well for me. And then I could do 2 other pumps, and then I would leave and go home. Heavy.
Sweet. So what kind of things would you recommend now, knowing what you know now, having pumped for these children? What kinds of things would you recommend to people who are planning on going back to work and pumping, logistically wise or gear wise, or setting aside time, conversations to have with providers? I mean, they're your bosses. What would you say, Julie?
I think for me, I had it very streamlined. I would wear a nursing tank. So then I would essentially pull up my scrub top, pull down my, top, unclip, put my pumping bra on. That took like 20 seconds total. And I did use one set of parts all day. I don't really know if this was the right thing to do, but I didn't even refrigerate them. I kind of just rationalized that the milk is good at room temperature for this many hours, and I'm going to pump, so then it's going to be fresh milk, and then I'm going to pump again, so it'll be more fresh milk, so it'll be fine. I don't know. It worked for me. My children never were affected by it.
Yeah, I mean, that's not the official guideline, but that's what a lot of people do. And I think the honest truth about what I think about that is there's the guidelines. And if your baby is immunocompromised, if they're fragile, if they're in the NICU, you're not going to do that. Right. Or if you're, if you work on a sick floor and you want to pump in a patient room, probably not a good idea, Right. But if everybody's healthy, there are hundreds of thousands, I would say, families that will do exactly what you do, Julie, and everybody
Right.
will be fine. But you don't want to make that recommendation for everybody because it's not appropriate for everybody.
Certainly.
But it's exploring what works for you after you figure out why are the recommendations there in the first place.
Certainly. And I think that for me at least was a huge time saver. I didn't, with my first, I had the wipes and I would wipe down the parts.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, that phased out pretty quickly. Um, it was just time consuming. Truthfully, I didn't have much time. I made pumping my priority. So I did everything else around pumping. I said that was important to me. Obviously I wasn't telling people, oh, I have all this milk in the freezer. I was literally telling people, if I don't pump right now, my baby doesn't eat. So like, I gotta go.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely would try splitting up my assignment and, seeking out people who weren't super busy or maybe had patients in close proximity to mine. I think eating while pumping was definitely key. I had my stuff just very organized in a bag and I just had it down to a great routine. Yeah,
Did you ever get good at hand expressing?
I really didn't know. I really never tried that.
Mm.
Um,
I always
no.
recommend that because when you're going back to work, sometimes like Marlena, you said you forgot a part.
Yeah, I would always pack my stuff the night before. So I actually was very fortunate in that I never forgot anything. I did one time have a girl that was pumping on the night shift when I was working days, and we had very similar milk coolers. Mine was empty, had like the 4 empty bottles, and hers was full. So I don't really understand how it happened. However, I think I may have pumped on the way to work. So there was some milk in mine. So maybe it had a little bit of weight. Anyways, she took my milk home with her.
Oh.
She went home, put it straight in the fridge, didn't open it, didn't look in it.
Mm-hmm.
I went to pump. Now she worked night shift. So I went to pump at whatever time I went to pump, opened up or picked up the cooler, and I was like, this isn't mine. Opened it, and sure enough, it wasn't mine. It was just a black cooler. Hers was also just a black cooler. Neither of us had our names on it. And I had to text her, and I was like kind of in a panic because I was like, I don't have bottles to pump into. Like, what am I going to do? But this girl just worked all night and she's probably sleeping. It took her a little while to respond. I was kind of panicking. Eventually she did respond within the hour and just drove back and like switched it out.
But you could have put your milk in a sterile.
I could.
Or transferred that milk into a sterile pea cup.
So it's funny because I definitely could have done that. And if this happened to me now, I would do that.
Yeah.
However, at the time, somebody convinced me because I believe one time I forgot to bring bottles. And someone convinced me that it wasn't smart to use the sterile containers because maybe they weren't BPA free.
Wow.
And I believed them.
Huh.
And I mean, I don't know, maybe they're not, but like you're not heating up the milk in them.
Right.
So like
right.
It's fine.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I was paranoid. So I dumped my milk down the drain that day because I think I had 2 bottles and that was it. And I think I even reached out to the nursing supervisors and was like, hey, do you know anyone who had a baby recently on another unit? Maybe they have an extra pumping bags that I can like steal from them. And they, didn't know anyone. So
I think another tip would be like take any bit of supplies that you need, including extra flanges, membranes, bottles, bags, anything you might possibly need, and just store a stash of extra stuff at your job. Or in your car, so you always have extra.
I put a handful of bags in my bag, and of course it never happened again. But
of course it never did.
Right, umbrella.
Another thing that I did have happen was have the hospital on generator power. So when the hospital goes on generator power, there's these like little red plugs that work, but only the red plugs work. The plugs that are white don't work. So the pumping room conveniently didn't have any red plugs.
Oh.
The PA room where I was pumping at the time also didn't have any red plugs. I couldn't find red plug anywhere. My manager's office didn't have any red plugs. Like there was no red plugs. So I was like kind of in a panic, and I was like, what am I going to do? I have to pump. And
Can't you go next to one of your ICU patients who's sleeping or heavily sedated and just put your back to them and pump while seated there?
Yeah, I mean, really,
right?
Good. But I think,
I just woke up. Oh, you did?
I can't remember. I feel like this may have happened a couple of times. Maybe once on nights and once on days. Ultimately, I just used a patient room that was empty. And, it's kind of weird because all the doors are glass. But I would just pull the curtain and put a sign and just hope no doctors walk in the wrong room to see their patient. So I just did that because conveniently all the red plugs are in the patient rooms and at the nurse's station, but not in these. There should be a red plug in the pumping room. Come on.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
That's why actually my first baby, I had a pump that had to be plugged in. When I was presented with the option with my second of upgrading to one that had a battery pack, I did. I spent the $50 to upgrade because my insurance would cover the one that you could plug in. But I had been in several situations with my first that were not even just at work. Like one time I was at a wedding and I needed to pump and I couldn't find anywhere to pump except the bar. So I actually pumped at the bar.
At the bar, or were you behind the bar?
I was at one of the tables at the bar, with my back to the bar, and I pumped there. So, but
did you make a Kahlua and cream with that?
Yeah, that would be a great idea. I should have done that. That would have been great. Yeah,
I think no fail plan was I'll just go to my car. But again, walking to your car takes so much extra time that you didn't plan for.
Yeah, depending on the weather, your car might be crazy hot or crazy cold.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's true. I mean, I guess I would just say these are things I wish I thought about before I went back. I wish I thought about the fact that, hey, what is my plan if, the hospital's on generator power, or, I definitely like you, Melissa, had times where I had to, throw off all my pumping stuff and run for a patient that was not doing well. That I didn't plan for. But overall, I think maybe I planned just enough. Because if I had planned for everything, I just would have had too much on my head and been too anxious.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I like what you said, Julie, that it wasn't an option to you to not pump. Even working in a busy ICU with very sick patients.
I made it a priority. It was important.
You made it a priority.
I work with other moms right now that are pumping. And the funny thing is, so one of them says, no, my pumping is my me time, so she won't do work on pumping times. And I'm always blown away that she only pumps once a day. Her daughter, I'm actually shocked she's still pumping. Her daughter's a little bit older, almost 2, I think. So she pumps once a day, but she makes it her me time, which I think is excellent and important. For me, that was never an option. For me, I've just always felt like I'm too busy, and I prioritize my patients over me. I'm definitely the person who's, if I have a choice between walking my patient and having to pump and eat at the same time, I'm going to choose that versus, okay, I'm not going to walk this patient. I'm going to eat now and then I'll pump after. Right. So definitely different priorities here. But for me, multitasking was huge. I said pumping is my priority. That's important to me. I made it work. And I also highly recommend a pumping bra. I have some friends who have never used a pumping bra, and they're like,
I don't know how they do it. I
Right,
don't.
and they're like, oh, it seems weird. And I'm like, isn't it weird to hold your flange on you the entire time? Don't your hands get
tired? Don't you want to do something?
Don't you want to scroll on your phone? Or don't you just want to do something?
Hands-on pumping, where you're actually squeezing your breasts, is really helpful, especially at the beginning of pumping, at the end of pumping.
I would do that occasionally.
Yeah, but you can do that with a pumping bra on.
Right.
And I've met friends who have been like, I don't know, it seems weird. Or why would I?
Or they have one pumping bra, they hated it, and so they just assume that there's not a better one out there, and they don't use one.
I had one friend who was like, I don't know, it seems weird. And I was like, listen, I'm buying you a pumping bra because it's $20 and you'll be thanking me for this because it's worth it.
It's so worth it. I agree.
I don't know how anybody pumps without a pumping bra.
I mean, people, it always is interesting to me how people spend their money on baby stuff. They won't spend the $20 on a pumping bra, but they'll spend $450 on a stroller system. And I'm just like, the amount of time that you're going to be pumping, if continuing this breastfeeding relationship is important to you, it's like spending a ton of money on like a sleeping bag, but not on your pillow that you use every night. It's like, if you're going to spend $350 on a sleeping bag you're going to use once every 10 years, why wouldn't you spend $70 on a pillow that you sleep on 10 hours or, you know, a day for, I just
10 hours. Who's sleeping 10 hours?
Some people, not me, not any moms. What about you, Marlena? If anybody is listening, going back to a corporate environment, male-dominated environment, an environment where not any, you know, would you have any recommendations for how to make pumping work for them?
So I definitely think at least putting it in your calendar and having a reminder is helpful, because then you'll not lose track of time. So I did keep it in my calendar, even though I didn't always abide by the rules. I did bring extra clothes because I'm like at a hospital where you guys wear scrubs. If something happens, you need extra clothes. I also brought wet wipes. I think they're called, or the water wipes. And when I would frequently spill on my jeans somehow, I don't know. We were like, this is casual, so you had to wear like, you know, like a button-up, a jacket, like with your jeans and boots. So I always, one side always filled up faster than the other, and I wouldn't notice it because I'd be typing, and all of a sudden my right leg would be warm.
Yep.
It would come up the hole. So those made sure that I didn't have any like weird wet stains, and they dried pretty fast. So water wipes are key for me to stay clean.
Another tip for that problem is to get bigger bottles.
That's true. Yeah.
Especially, I'm sure, Julie, did you end up having bigger bottles because you had so much milk?
I never actually had bigger bottles, but I definitely have had to switch bottles like halfway through. Yeah. But I never actually overflowed. I think I was just more attentive. Like I paid attention to how much was in there. I didn't get too zoned away with anything else.
Yeah. I've definitely had people who spill.
I second all the things you guys said as far as like bringing the extra clothes. One time I dropped an entire bottle of milk all over myself. And not only was I crying over the spilt milk, but I was soaked to my underwear in breast milk. And I was at the office, so there wasn't like a stash of scrubs. Yeah. So I just had to like blot myself.
Oh, come on. You could have put a hospital gown on.
Yeah, just walk in the hospital. So extra clothes. I always kept a hand pump in my desk.
Manual pump.
So that if I forgot the pump, you know, once with my third baby, by that point I had 2 pumps. I had given my first pump away to a friend whose pump broke. So I kept one pump at work and I kept one pump at home. I have a friend who worked as a professor, and I'm too cheap to do this, but this worked well for her. She bought 5 separate pump sets. Yep. And so she would, you know, not have to worry because she at home, and then it's tubby time and bedtime and this time and whatever, and she was doing evening classes, and sometimes she wouldn't remember to wash her pump parts at night, and so that made her anxious. So she would always have an extra set. She just had 5 sets that she would set at the beginning of the week, all the things she needed in big Ziploc bags, or maybe they were wet bags or something like that. I did what Julie did as far as I didn't wash my pump parts after I pumped. I know, like you were saying, Jeanette, the CDC technically doesn't recommend that, but to me that would have ended my pumping abilities.
And
if
I think
that's
the problem with recommendations is that when you apply a public health recommendation to everybody, there are people who will no longer pump and they will switch to formula. And that, while of course people can choose formula if they want to, of course, and that is one area. But if somebody who's committed to breastfeeding and wants to is feeling like, well, I can't wash them every time, so, oh my God, I can't continue pumping. That's so hard. I have to quit. Then the baby's not getting this biologically normal food that they're supposed to get. Right. And the parent is not meeting her goals.
To me, that's an unnecessary barrier. So what I would do is I would pump, I'd pour my milk in bottles or bags, and then I would reassemble my pump parts and stick them in a cloth diaper wet bag, or if a big Ziploc bag, like a downside bag, and I'd put them in the cooler with my milk. I had an oversized cooler so that I could fit the pump parts and my milk, because I don't know about you, Julie, but the fridge at work is always disgusting. So I would always just keep it in my own cooler. And one time I did forget.
What's that?
Yeah.
I didn't refrigerate my pump parts for that reason, because I didn't want to like overtake the fridge that literally is so stuffed. And there's like, I don't know, the people that open a carton of milk to put like a drop in their coffee and think it's
leave that carton of milk. What is up with that, people?
I never understand those people. Nobody's drinking the open carton of milk. Nobody.
Yep. Not a single person. Never.
Gross. Like,
it's so gross. Every hospital I've ever worked at, someone's like, I don't want to be wasteful. It's like, but you are wasteful, because this is, if you don't drink the rest of the milk, no one else is going to do it. So
it's so weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I did put my cooler in the fridge, but that just had my milk in it.
Oh, got it. So yeah, and one time I did forget bottles, and I also usually keep extra bags in my pump bag. I didn't have any of those. So what I did was I bought a Poland Springs bottle of water, and I drank the water, and then I poured my milk into the Poland Springs bottle. So that's another option too. But oh man,
not for repeated use, but in a desperate moment.
not for repeated, but in a pinch, I was like, well, I might as well.
Yeah.
So, and is there any last things that you guys want to share with our listeners about, any, I guess, inspiration for them? If there's anybody listening who is pregnant or on maternity leave and really wants to make a breastfeeding relationship work when they go back to work, any words of inspiration? Marlena, you first.
I think just don't be scared and ask a lot of questions to your support system. And if you don't have a support system, you can call Jeanette and Melissa.
Yay!
That's a great answer.
Melissa, my beck and call whenever I want questions answered, and so that was super helpful. But I didn't have any college friends or like of my friends now. All of them stayed home after they had their babies, which is wonderful. So I felt alone in the fact that I couldn't ask any of their advice, and I really wanted to hear what people had going back to a corporate job, and I didn't really get any of that. So going to these groups and meeting other moms and was really helpful to like know and hear from other people's experiences. And the group I went to, it was in Acton, and the leader was just really nice and caring, and everybody just wants you to succeed when you go to these types of groups. So that was really helpful.
Melissa, can you interject too? Both you and Marlena discovered through a program that I did that smaller flanges worked better for you to get even more milk.
Oh yeah. So funny story. I had pumped and breastfed for probably a total of 5 years with 2 other children, and I was using the wrong flange size the entire time.
But you were making plenty of milk. It was fine. I was
making plenty of milk, but it wasn't painful, but it was definitely not comfortable. It felt like someone was like painfully like when someone painfully stretches your skin, like if you took your fingers on the corner of your mouth and pulled hard, that's what it felt like every time my nipple went into the pump. And I just thought that that's just the way pumping felt, because it wasn't painful. It just wasn't comfortable. And so long story short, Jeanette, you had done a pumping for birth professionals kind of group, or pumping for professionals that want to learn more about pumping, like not that for personal use, but to help their clients or whatnot. And you had asked on the Babies in Common Facebook page if anybody was actively lactating would come and be like an in-person model. And so I was like, I show my boobs to anybody, sure. So
yeah, so there were like 4 or 5 of you, and we were just trying different pumps
and so
and
you were
different
like,
flanges.
Hey Melissa, why don't you, is that really the flange you use? And it was the standard 24 millimeter flange that came with my pump. And you were like, I was like, yeah. And you're like, try this. I think it was a 17 millimeter. It was really tiny. And when my nipple went into it, it touched the sides of the barrel, which I thought was the answer.
I remember it being a 15.
Yeah. A 15 maybe. Okay. 15.
Because I remember the way I remember it was that I was like, you didn't look like you were totally comfortable. You were making plenty of milk, and you didn't necessarily, in that moment, to me, I wasn't thinking, oh, you should have a smaller one. I actually just wanted you to try it. I remember, I feel like I even said like for just kicks and giggles, would you try this smaller one? I don't even know like how you're going to feel about it, but just, and you're like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
And then
So
you put it on.
well, so the pump instructions, which apparently are not correct, they tell you that, you know, you don't ever want your nipple to touch the side of the barrel. And so you want like plenty of space around the nipple, which means that some of your areola gets sucked into the pump barrel.
Tunnel.
So I put on this
yeah.
15 tunnel, whatever. I put on this 15 millimeter flange where my nipple exactly fit inside of it. None of my areola got pulled into it. And it was painless. I cannot stress this enough. It was, I couldn't even tell if the pump was on or not. There was no stretching, no pain, no discomfort.
You were like,
and I got like
I
2
feel
extra
nothing.
ounces on like each side. It was something insane.
Mhm.
And so I, you know, got those flanges. And yeah, my pumping,
you told Marlena about him, and Marlena's like, I'll try it.
Yeah, I was like, you got to try these flanges, Marlena. So it goes to show you that like you do pumping consults. If anybody is, you know, interested in going
and
back
I can
to
do
work
them
and,
virtually.
oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So, you know, it's just something to think about, because again, people are like, oh, I don't want to spend the money on something like that. But if you're going to be pumping 3-4 times a day for, you know, months and months, like you might as well be comfortable and get more milk faster if you can. Right. So I think it's worth it. I'm always learning something. With every baby, I've learned something. And so, you know, it's great to just kind of keep an open mind. I agree. As far as what you were saying, Marlena, you know, ask lots of questions, reach out to other people who have done it. What about you, Julie? Any inspiration for?
So I would definitely reiterate what Marlena said about finding your support. You know, I really struggled with my first. And unfortunately, when we left the hospital, I was never given a plan. It was essentially the plan was pump. My child didn't latch in the hospital. The plan was pump and bottle feed and continue to try. And I didn't really know anything better. And I was anxious to get home. And I was just like, I had spent the whole day crying because he wasn't latching. And I was just like, okay, that's the plan. So I went home and I went with that plan and I continued to try, but I knew it wasn't normal. And I did get him latched myself with a nipple shield. But again, I knew it wasn't normal. So I Googled and I found some resources. And I'm so thankful that I did, because I really feel like it's been a wealth of knowledge. And, you know, I'm not the type of person to give up. So maybe I would have figured it out on my own and like been fine. But it certainly made life a lot easier finding support. I loved going to the Babies in Common meetings. It was so helpful, you know, just to be, it was like something I looked forward to, not just because it was like a breastfeeding group, but because it was a group of other moms who were in the same predicament that I was in, who was going through the same things that I was going through. And it was just nice to be able to show up, and nobody cared about anything. Like nobody judged you. You show up in your pajamas, you show up looking like $1 million. Nobody cares. You know, you're there to talk about feeding your babies and what's going on. And it was so supportive. And I feel like that definitely helped me get through so many struggles with all 3 of my children. More so the first and second. I think with my third, I'm just so busy with my other kids that I, you know, unfortunately haven't had time to go as much. But I definitely would reiterate those, finding your support and using your support system. When Braden, my second child, went on his nursing strike at 9 months, I was, you know, overwhelmed and in a panic. And you had suggested, Jeanette, to me doing a nursing party. And I had all these moms that, you know, some of them I knew from group, some of them I never met. Some of them I literally had no clue who they were. But these moms just came over to my house and I made them food. And everybody sat around, and it was like we had our own, in my house, Babies in Common meeting. And
That's adorable.
And it was so helpful.
The idea being that your baby would see all these other kids nursing.
Yes.
And while it didn't change it, and Braden did not end up nursing again, it was helpful and it was supportive. And you know what? Even though it didn't make my child nurse, it gave me the strength I needed to say, I can pump, I can do this. Like I can exclusively pump now for the next, you know, 3 months or however long I need to, because I have these moms standing behind me. And some of them, like I said, I didn't even know. I met when they came to my house. And that's the kind of community that you know, it's out there. You just, unfortunately, some places don't give you those resources. So I definitely think finding your support system. And then I guess my other piece of advice would be that you can do it if you make it a priority. If this is something you want to do, stick with it and make it your priority. Make it work because it's possible. I've had days where it seemed impossible, but I prioritized, and maybe I had to eat, or maybe I skipped a meal even, or maybe I, you know, had coworkers that were annoyed at me because they were super busy, and here I was handing off another patient. You know, with my other two children, I fortunately was working days. So if it was really busy, I had no problem marching in my manager's office and saying, I need to go pump. Can somebody watch my patients?
Mm-hmm.
And
Well,
handing
and
them.
now there's pumps out there. There's mixed reviews and mixed results depending on the person, but some people are finding luck, not all, with some of those wearable pumps.
Right. And I did have a coworker who used one. She trained with me on days and used it. And then she ended up going to nights and using it on nights. She didn't stay too long at my hospital. She ended up eventually quitting pretty while she was still breastfeeding and just decided that she wanted to stay at home with her child. But while she was working, she did put it on and just worked right along. And she
Yeah,
was like,
bedside.
days, and she
That's
was like, this is
awesome.
important. I want to make it work. And you know, kudos to her because like we've said, I'm not in a mom baby like
Unit.
unit.
Well, I don't know if that would work for Marlena because those machines, they're so quiet, the wearable pumps, they're quiet, but
They're
to work
quiet,
in a
but they're
corporate
very
environment, they're larger, so you'd look larger. And Marlena, you said your shirts had to be kind of tight anyway. But, you know, like if it's a quiet meeting and you hear,
oh
Ah.
you know, like,
Yeah, there's a
you're
lot of
like, I'm
noise in the
sitting next to you.
ICU.
What do you have in your shirt or your pants, Marlena? What's going on?
that you can get away with that. But
Yeah.
certainly, I don't know that you could get away with that in a meeting. But you know, I think I would just tell people that if this is important to you and there's no other option, you find ways to make it work. People are very creative, you know. You can
Very creative.
dig
I'd
down
also
deep
say
and
if
be creative.
you don't want to do it for you, right? Like if you feel bad asking someone for help or making the time because you're like, oh, this is something that I'm asking for me, then flip it on its head like Julie did and make it about the baby. Like, this is something my baby needs. If I don't do this, my baby doesn't eat. And so I'm not asking for a personal favor. I'm not asking to go take a massage or a smoke break. I'm not asking to lay down and have a nap.
Yeah.
I need to, I'm away from my baby. That's already hard enough. Right? Nobody should have to have guilt about staying home or going to work, but you know, we all do. And so one way I know that it helped me, the long shifts, the long drives to Cambridge,
Yeah.
being away from my baby was like, you know what, this is something I'm doing for my baby when I'm away and he needs this. And when I'm not with him and he's with a babysitter, he's getting my milk that
Yeah.
smells like me and tastes like my milk. And that is important to me. So I am going to make it work, not because I'm asking for something special, but because this is something my baby needs. If I don't pump, my baby doesn't eat. And that was, I think that's a great mindset to have, even though we should feel like we can do it for us too. There's many benefits to us too. But if you have to make it about the baby to give yourself permission to do it, then do that. It's something that is, you know, only you can give. So
I wanted to add one more thing about that too, is that I have met people where I've discussed thoroughly their work situation, and it's not ideal. It may not be what the law supports, but their work environment just does not let them pump the number of times that they should be technically pumping. And so it's like, okay, well, you're in that situation. It's not ideal, it sucks, but that's your life. So could you pump extra times when you're with the baby?
yeah.
You know, in the evenings, the weekends, could you arrange different time frames where you're boosting your supply at different times so that you can be at work for a longer period without pumping? And for some people that'll work. And I know this whole conversation we've been having today isn't necessarily what people with a low supply, you know, sometimes you guys all made plenty of milk and not everybody does, but even
Sure.
you know, making time to pump if you have a low supply is even more important. But again, figuring out even some milk is amazing. So when you can find that time within the week, whether you're at work or not, having that extra time so that you can be making a little bit extra so you can feed it to your baby can work for some people instead of just saying, oh, I can't do it at work, so forget it all. I won't do it at all.
Certainly, when I had to switch to exclusively pumping for my second child, I focused on just trying to pump as often as I could, so that if I couldn't for a stretch of time, I had already made up for it. So even if it was like, oh, I'm going grocery shopping, so I don't technically need to pump right now because I really had plenty of milk and maybe I'm not even going to be gone that long. So like, I really don't need to pump. It was like, oh, here's an opportunity to pump. I might as well. I didn't leave home without my pump at that point. But you know, I think that if it's something you really want, then you can hopefully find a way to make it work.
Yep.
I'd also say don't put the cart before the horse. If you're at home on maternity leave and you're starting to panic about, you know, what am I going to do when I go back to work? And, you know, you don't know until you try. Sometimes we imagine it being so much harder than it actually is. And you can always stop breastfeeding. You can always stop pumping. You can't always restart. So I feel like sometimes people talk themselves out of breastfeeding or continuing breastfeeding because they're thinking about going back to work and what's that going to look like. And a lot can change in weeks or months. And, you know, it might be the case that you have plenty of milk and you don't need to pump as much, and you can make up for it because the baby nurses in the evening a ton, or, you know, on the weekends a ton or whatnot. Or maybe it's the case that for whatever reason, however it unfolds, that you're, not having to pump during the day and your baby's getting formula, but you're breastfeeding all still every time you're together.
Right.
Like there's hybrid models too, that, you know, baby's still getting some of your milk, still gets the benefits
versus
of
quitting. And so many people
versus
stop.
quitting entirely. Exactly.
Yeah, so many people, like if you look at the rates of breastfeeding success across the country, rates drop significantly at 3 months. And a lot of times when I say to people, what do you think is the number one reason why people quit? They go, oh, because they're going back to work. And I'm like, well, that's not the number one reason. A lot more people quit in the second or third week. It's not, you know, but it's really having the logistical knowledge and being creative and getting that support is so key.
That goes along with having your support system, because honestly, if you have this big group of people and they're all there to say, oh no, I did this, or no, you don't have to stop, you could do this, or hey, I actually formula fed and breastfed. You learn so much with that group of people. So I wish there were more groups out there. Maybe there are, and I'm just
now that we're virtual.
Yeah.
And that will probably, once we go back in person, I think having that virtual support will also be a really great option to continue. And everybody's going to be much more used to virtual. So people who don't want to leave their house for some reason or have those 2 other kids at home can be doing a meeting.
Right. So, and you can just mute people so they don't hear kids screaming in the background, you know?
Yeah. And you literally don't have to shower. I mean, I always said in the in-person groups, like, show up unshowered. We don't care. But when you're home, you literally don't have to. Yeah.
Nobody cared.
As I've always said from the beginning, you don't even know if I'm wearing pants now or not. I mean, it's a beautiful thing about Zoom. Thank you so much, ladies, for coming on. This has been so wonderful to hear from you and sharing your tips and strategies and stories. I hope our listeners are feeling inspired and empowered to meet their breastfeeding goals, even if they will be going back to work. Our next episode will come out after August 12th, and we will be discussing maternal mental health with Dr. Rachel Smook, who I'm very excited to hear from.
Awesome. Well, we hope you'll visit babiesincommon.com/show to see all our previous episodes and see what we have coming up. And our show's available, as always, as a video recording as well as a podcast on our website, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. And please like Babies in Common on Facebook and other social media sites, and check out the website for helpful resources and advice. We hope that everything we do is going to help you rock your birth and thrive as a new parent, because as always, remember that Babies in Common is a community for you, because we all have babies in common.
There we go. Have a great night, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you guys.